Day 529 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a quick look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia is sitting on 249,700 military personnel losses, so obviously just shy of that 250,000 mark now. Then as for hardware losses, 5 tanks, 11 APVs, a Mammoth 22 artillery, and 1 MLRS, so that's the rocket artillery, which is always important to neutralize given their unguided barrage of rockets into any area that can cause quite a bit of needless devastation. Then we'll move back across to the map today, where it really appears that Russian air and naval defense has just clocked out for the weekend. As just after my last update, Ukraine had since struck an additional Russian naval vessel with a Ukrainian unmanned naval drone, just near to the Crimean Bridge at the Kerch Strait. And this time it was the SIG Russian chemical tanker, for which this tanker was actually used to deliver aircraft fuel from occupied Crimea to Syria, which actually led to the US putting it on its sanctions list way back in 2019. Now, Russian media themselves reported that the tanker vessel received a breach to the area of its engine room, but they didn't specify as to how this occurred. Which again is classic Russia trying to save face once more. But against the weight of such videographic evidence released by Ukraine, as we can see here, we quickly understand what happened in any case. And for that matter, why Russia is embarrassed about providing any further details. Do note, Ukraine doesn't even really have a navy to speak of, and yet they're now more than ever flipping the script as they clearly have it set in their sights to have Russia do without one too. And interestingly, Russia is largely just dealing with Ukrainian surface naval drones performing these strikes right now, based on all the footage we've recently seen, as Ukraine continues to ramp up in every way, including the upcoming underwater naval drones, which truly Russia is going to have an even more difficult time in counteracting. Because we know that Ukraine is developing multiple different versions of these types of new underwater drones as we speak, including this little known Marichka torpedo-style underwater drone as well that looks pretty lethal. Also, in light of these events, Ukraine has just issued a warning to multiple nearby Russian ports to the Crimean Peninsula, putting them on notice, declaring that those ports are at war risk, which Ukraine considers quite an equal and measured response to how Russia is also recently threatening Ukrainian ports, particularly as it just recently left the grain deal. So it's just like the law of physics that states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Then heading across to the Ukrainian map, so Ukraine has faced one of the largest recent missile and drone barrages from Russia during the night, which included intercepting cruise missiles and Shahed drones. But in this infographic, here's a better breakdown graphic of that, as we can see Ukrainian air defenses that took out 17 caliber cruise missiles out of the 20. Then of note were the 0 of 3 Kinzhal missile interceptions, likely due to Russia striking at a number of more westerly Ukrainian locations, such as Melnitsky and Zhytomyr and some other oblasts there, which those locations probably have less air defense infrastructure, as opposed to more often hammered positions such as Kyiv, Odessa, Zaporizhia, and so on. Oh, and that graphic doesn't display it, but all 27 of the Shahed drones were in fact intercepted. Then we'll briefly move across to the Bakhmut axis today, as more than half of Klishchivka is now Ukrainian controlled, although it's very difficult to see it on this map so far. However, due to Russian artillery, total liberation is just not yet accomplished. Also, just south of there, fighting over Kurdimivka has started as Ukrainian units entered the outskirts. Then, just a little bit further down at Zaitseva, Ukrainian forces hit a Russian ammunition dump with a drone-spotted indirect strike, which, given its proximity to the front lines just above it, it's very strategically significant as it affects Russian munitions resupplies to those very front lines just mentioned earlier. Then somewhere else in the east, so again, a T-55 was damaged by a Ukrainian anti-tank mine. Again, this is some extremely aged 70-year-old Soviet tank hardware. Why are you using this, Russia? Just go home already. With zero signs of factory upgrades. Although it did have a cope cage installed on the field with what I believe to be an RPG munition dud round hanging off it. Such a shame that one didn't go off. Then we'll head across to the Orikhiv axis on the south there today, as Ukrainian forces are moving towards Verbova at this stage. And a bunch of reports suggest that the AFU has breached the first line of Russian defenses at this location, gaining them more access to that settlement. Then moving across to the adjacent oblast of Kherson. So over the past week, Ukrainian forces have significantly expanded the bridgehead on the islands in the direction of the city of Oleshki. And it is interesting how we sometimes come to know this information, as in this instance, Russia was performing artillery strikes on the largely controlled south bank of the Russian-controlled south bank of the Dnipro River, which indicates the expansion of the Ukrainian bridgehead for further AFU offensive actions later. Plus, combine that with Russian mill bloggers also now stating their concerns of Ukrainian expansion on the south bank of the river as being of a very serious concern for Russia now, for the Russian army. Oh, and this is happening on multiple fronts at the moment. It's not just near Oleshki or just north of that town, but also near the city of Hola Pristan, a little bit further down there to the southwest. And as a result of all this, it's likely that liberated Kherson City itself might get a little reprieve from all of that Russian artillery shelling that's been ongoing recently, as the Russian forces themselves are forced to focus on the much more impending danger of Ukrainian landing parties on the very same south bank that Russia is on. Then heading across to some news for today, we'll start out with another hardware update. So Lithuania has announced it will provide Ukraine with additional NASAMS launchers, but not yet specifying the total number. Now, these are just the additional launchers to be provided soon. However, Lithuania has already provided Ukraine with 2 complete NASAMS batteries late last year. So they're effectively adding to the mix for a system that has a range of about 50 kilometers or about 30 miles, and a platform that uses some very readily available AIM-120 AMRAAM interceptor missiles that are often used a lot on or in conjunction with Western fighter jets as well. Hence all of the available stockpiles. Then in some other hardware news, a handful of UK Supercat mobile air defense platforms have now just been confirmed as having already been sent to Ukraine from the UK. Although we don't know exactly when this happened, perhaps in the last couple of months, and we don't know exactly what a handful constitutes, they're very handy platforms due to their mobility, range, and the fact that they use the cheaper ASRAAM missiles. Also, their 25-kilometer range, or about 15-mile range, also makes them particularly useful for Russian attack helicopters, which I might add, in the last month or so, we've noticed an uptick in those types of Russian losses. So it's likely this information about the delivery of these platforms to Ukraine from the UK was only announced now to allow these platforms to get an early, unexpected jump on those Russian attack helicopters. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, this one's a little bit different, but due to internal Russian political pressures to not mobilize more of their population, Russia is getting pretty desperate as it seeks to get alternative avenues to get some more boots on the ground in the front line for Russia. And this time by way of offering sign-up bonuses to citizens of neighboring country Kazakhstan. But citizens of Kazakhstan don't actually live in an isolated Russian propaganda information bubble where everything is painted as winning and rosy, thus making for this soldier bolstering attempt, let's say, well, a pretty unconvincing, feeble attempt at that. Then moving across to the lighter side of news today, the Ukrainian coat of arms, Trident, is already on the Kyiv Motherland Monument. And it's actually replacing the long-time hammer and sickle Soviet emblem, which was just removed a few days ago now, for an update that is well overdue at this point. Then moving across to a quick funny to round it all off with today, guys. So when things aren't really working out for Russia, they seem to then tap on their most valued resource once again, the babushkas. And I can't even tell you at this point how cringeworthy and desperate I find all of this. And so these babushkas, which are probably paid in a sack of potatoes, let's be honest, say things like, "We, the Putin detachments, appeal to you," as they spout some ghastly backwards rhetoric as per usual. But another problem I find with this is, if the Russian mafia state is so strong and so winning, why do they have to make these babushka appeal videos to the quote-unquote losing side? And after forcing myself to read all of this, it's really not worth it. But, well, you know what? If you just swap the name Zelensky for Putin and Ukraine for Russia in these monologues, babushka monologues, it actually pretty much spot on makes perfect sense. So that'll be it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Appreciate all of your watches and subscriptions, likes and comments, as I like to hang out there in the comments section when I do get a moment or two. And yeah, I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.